All right. So anyway, thanks for joining Entomology. This is our first week, and we're going to discuss a little bit about insects. As you can imagine, in an entomology class, these are among the most successful animals Earth has ever seen. If you were even just to talk about ants, for instance, and you were to weigh all the humans on Earth and compare them to the weight of all the ants on Earth, they would come out the same, and that's just one group of insects. Even something like beetles have over 350,000 different species. So there's a huge number and lots of diversity when it comes to this very successful group of animals. Most of you know insects have 6 legs, for instance. That's one of the big ways of identifying insects. They also have an external skeleton. So they're a type of arthropod, actually. They're called hexapoda. And I will provide a little bit of that information on that as well. They're also kind of unique in the fact that a lot of insect species fly and can go through complete metamorphosis, where their body can be completely different from when they're larvae to adults. Why is it important to study insects? We're going to get into that, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that A, they're really cool. I mean, you don't have to leave our planet to look at something that's kind of alien-like compared to us in many ways. But again, you can still study insects and learn a lot about us. I mean, social biology was learned by studying ants and their societies. They're a social insect, but also because they're so economically important. They are a serious pest of all those corn and soybean plants that you see outside in Illinois. And we spend, millions, if not billions of dollars trying to protect our crops from these insects because we like to eat. The other thing is insects are really economically or medically important to us because they can spread diseases as well. Some countries are still plagued heavily by mosquito-borne diseases, like malaria, for instance, which is a protus that is secreted by the insect or the mosquito saliva that is a parasite of red blood cells. So there's all sorts of things about insects that make them important for our study. So entomology is, as you can imagine, ology for this all the time. If you take a biology and things like that, ology is the study of, and so in this case, entomology is the scientific study of insects. And as I mentioned before, insects are among the most prolific and most successful group of animals on Earth. If I was to ask or poll a typical person, let alone even our biology students in this class, tell me some different animals, invariably they would tell me animals that they're most familiar with us, and albeit even probably the most similar to them as humans. You talk about something nice and fluffy and like your dog or your cat or koala bear, you'd come up with something that was a mammal most likely. You might put out a bird or amphibian or reptile, but you'd most likely say some type of mammal. Yet they are such the minority when it comes to animals on Earth. Insects by far outnumber all these vertebrate animals that you would normally think of. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't other types of animals that are very diverse too. Nematodes is an example. Those are roundworms. These are a type of arthropod that would be very abundant and have lots of different species as well. So invertebrates in general are the most common animals on Earth, and insects in particular, albeit mostly they're terrestrial animals. You don't see a lot in the oceans, for instance. There are other types of arthropods that are predominant in oceans, but you will see lots of insects in, like in freshwater streams and things like that. So here we are, over 1 million different species of insects. Now, there's lots of different orders of insects. I'm not sure what the number is right now, but just a reminder, it's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So order, it's that kind of that middle ground after class, kingdom, phylum, class, order. And so there's 5 big orders of insects, but I think there's around 20 something orders of insects. I'm not even sure what the real number is. They even kind of argue, the experts in various areas of entomology argue over the number of orders there are. So anywhere between 20 and 30 orders at any given time. Some people are what they call clumpers, and some are called splitters. So they'll split orders and or families or whatever species, and some join them together. But the 5 big orders of insects are Coleoptera. These are beetles. They have a hard shell called a elytra. Then we have our Hymenoptera. These are things like ants and bees, flies, and wasps. They're all related to each other, by the way. Even Hymenoptera, like ants, the queens will have wings. And then there's Diptera. These are flies, and there's lots of different fly species, even flies that might look like bees, like syrphids. But they are known for having the 2 wings and halteres. Then there's Lepidoptera. These are our butterflies, our moths, and our skippers. And then there's Hemiptera, which have piercing, sucking mouth parts. And I'm not sure if they've joined it with Homooptera, but these are typically insects like aphids and stink bugs and stuff like that. But these are our 5 big orders. But there's lots of other orders of insects as well. But these are the ones that you see most predominantly, most successful. And these are also the orders that go through what we call complete metamorphosis. What I mean by that is they go from a larval state, like a caterpillar, and become a butterfly or moth in the case of Lepidoptera, or they become maggots like flies, and then they end up becoming our house flies. So they'll be a maggot first. And this is also true for Hymenoptera. They're going to be a little larvae. And so is Coleoptera and so forth. There are some insects, though, that do not go through complete metamorphosis, like our cockroaches. There'll be a baby cockroach that looks like a bigger cockroach. So those are examples of insects that do not go through complete metamorphosis. What is the benefit of going through complete metamorphosis? Well, you get to take advantage of different types of life histories, different types of life stages. So if you go through complete metamorphosis, you can be a larvae chewing on a plant and then become a butterfly and then go off and reproduce and drink nectar. So you can have a totally different lifestyle, take advantage of different environments. So there's real benefit to being able to do that. So here is the representatives of these different orders. This is actually a type of fly. This is actually known as a robber fly. It has 2 wings, and so this is part of the order Diptera. And then over here we have Hymenoptera, and this is a type of wasp. I think it's known as a vespid. And then here we have a example of a moth. And you'll get to know the difference between moths and butterflies, but typically moths have a thicker abdomen, tend to be a little bit, while they can be shiny in colors, they're not usually as flamboyant as butterflies. And then this is actually a longhorn beetle of some sort. You can tell that by the antenna being really long. And we know it's a beetle because they have 4 wings. The outer ring is called an elytrum. I believe that's the right word. It is a hard shell, and then underneath it is the wings that allow them to fly. And then they don't have a representative of the Hemiptera in this picture. But here's one. So here's our Hemiptera. So you can't see it right here, but here's the piercing, sucking mouth part. This one is actually known as an assassin bug, and it'll run around and eat other insects that are happen to be that come along and want to take some nectar or whatever from this. So this insect has what they call raptorial legs and will actually grab onto its prey and eat it. So insects are important for ecosystems. If we didn't have, the reality is, if humans were killed off on Earth for whatever reason, maybe an asteroid or we do it to ourselves or whatever, as long as there wasn't a nuclear holocaust, if we just somehow vanished like they did in the X-Men where the guy snaps his finger, the Earth would keep on keeping on and probably wouldn't really miss us too much, even though there are some animals that would invariably, like your house cats and domestic animals. But if all the insects disappeared, the planet really would have a hard time functioning. For instance, most of the insects are or a lot of insects are pollinators, not most. And pollination is critical for flower development and for plants to form. They make up important parts of the aquatic or the terrestrial food chains or food webs. And they're also decomposers, and they're breaking down, dead stuff and making it into reusable by the environment. So they are very critical for environmental, not just food webs, but every aspect of the environment. So they're far more critical than we are for keeping the environment going as a whole, insects as a whole. So here's a decomposer, for instance. This is a dung beetle. Again, we know it's a beetle, and we know so it's part of Coleoptera. And here it has its hardened outer wing called an elytron, and underneath it is a soft wing. Here is pollination taking place. And we always think of honeybees, but there's lots of different native bees that are also important for pollination throughout in the United States as well as throughout the world. And as I mentioned before, they also have all sorts of other importance as well. Here's economic importance. This is a beetle also. We tell from its outer ring. I'm trying to remember, lost track of what it's called right off the top of my head, but it's feeding on it's cotton bollworm. So this is, or cotton, excuse me. Cotton, it's a beetle. Not having a little weevil, excuse me. It's a weevil. So here it is feeding on a cotton boll. It's going to become a flower and the cotton would be in there. So it's causing economic damage. So this is a cotton boll weevil. Here's gypsy moths causing all sorts of damage. Gypsy moths can cause havoc on our forests. And so here you can see gypsy moths deforesting forest. Here's a female and a male, and then the larvae are chewing up and eating up all the leaves. And so that's what this brown area in the forest is. So they cause serious havoc to our environment in some cases, not all cases, right? When they're overabundant. This here is one that we work with. I believe this is the corn earworm. So this is a caterpillar that we work with in my lab. It has 6 true legs, and these are different body segments. So here's its head. And then we haven't talked about the anatomy of insects yet, but this is the thorax. We know that because the legs are associated with it. And then you might think these are legs too, but we actually call these prolegs or fake legs. And so we have the abdomen of the insect, which is about 7 or 8 segments. So these are all different segments. Now, you might not realize this, but insects breathe through their body walls, not through their mouths. So they're not sitting there breathing through the walls. And they do so through these little holes called spiracles that are found on each of the different body segments. And then the air goes through tubes called trachea that provide oxygen directly to the tissues. Again, remember, insects have 6 true legs. So you can see that this is 3 legs here, and then there's 3 on the other side that you can't see. And then these legs are on the abdomen, aren't really real legs. They're called prolegs. Anyway, this becomes a brown moth. This is economically very important species of caterpillars because they'll feed on just about any or so many of the different economically important plants. Corn, for instance, soybeans, a little bit, tomato plants. As you know, cannabis is actually becoming legalized in Illinois. And so some of it's being grown here and elsewhere. This caterpillar is actually becoming a serious pest on those leaves. And then if you remember, the Bible and other places talk about plague of locusts. Well, these are all locusts causing economic ravaging an area, eating everything in sight. So insects can become a very serious economical concern. Some insects can be useful to us biologically as well. This is a Hymenoptera. So this is a wasp. Wasps all have this kind of wasp-like waist. Have you ever heard of that wasp-like waist? Well, this is the thorax of the insect. There's the 6 true legs. Notice the wings are on the thorax as well. And then this is the abdomen. So there's a part of the abdomen that's kind of pinched. That's what we're talking about when we say a wasp-like waist. Even though it's not really the waist, but it's kind of between the thorax and the abdomen. And then, of course, here's our antenna and stuff like that. Well, a lot of wasps are very small and can actually sting a caterpillar, lay the eggs inside the caterpillar, and then emerge. The larvae will eat inside it. The eggs have been growing inside the caterpillar and kill off something like this caterpillar here. And so sometimes these wasps can be very beneficial, and we call that when they are beneficial and can kill these other caterpillars, we consider them biological control agents. And so predators like ladybugs can sometimes be beneficial as long as we don't kill them off with pesticides too. They can actually help keep the ecosystem in balance. So anyway, parasitic wasps, we have, again, can sting, lay their eggs in a caterpillar, and then the larvae will feed inside the caterpillar and emerge. And so if you might remember this from Aliens, the movie Alien, that's probably where they got the idea, where the larvae laid eggs inside this person and then the alien emerges. So if you've seen the original movie Alien or Aliens, they probably got the idea from parasitic wasps because that's exactly what the larvae do. They will emerge from the caterpillar. Also, moths are important for making silk. The caterpillar spit of silk moths are important for the clothing you wear. So silk moths make clothing. So insects have lots of different value to us. And some people eat insects in different parts of their countries where it's harder to get cows and stuff like that. People will eat insects. And actually, there is a lot to be said about that, even if it might seem nasty to our Western senses. The reality is that they eat less further down the food chain. So it causes less they make more pounds of food as an insect for less plant material that they eat in comparison to a cow or something like that. So there is some benefit. You get more protein out of an insect per the amount of land that's used. Obviously, insects are important because they do spread diseases. As I mentioned before, and I'm not saying it here, but as I mentioned before, the malaria is spread by wasps. They're spread by mosquitoes. Bubonic plague was spread by fleas. Malaria, as I mentioned, it was spread by mosquitoes. You can also have African sleeping sickness, which is another, I can't remember if it's a bacteria or not, but that's also spread by insects. But there's a variety of insect-borne diseases. In fact, If you become an expert in entomology, to get a master's degree or a PhD in entomology, you can actually become what they call a medical entomologist and actually be an entomologist working in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force as an officer. So if I'd wanted to go that route after I got my PhD, I could have been a captain in the military as a medical entomologist. There's also entomologists often that work in public health departments to help prevent these diseases. So we do have, even our public health department, it's about trying to lower the mosquito population and survey for viruses. And that's also usually surveying ticks. That's all kind of under that umbrella. Here's a flea that, as I mentioned before, can spread bubonic plague using mice and rats or something like that. Here's our mosquitoes. You might not realize that, but the female mosquito is the one that bites you. And why they have to do this is because they need the blood to provide the proteins needed for the eggs to grow and be successful. So male mosquitoes won't bite humans. They'll just feed on plant nectar. But the female mosquitoes, as I mentioned before, need that blood meal to help make sure that their eggs mature. They can actually smell the carbon dioxide in your breath. So when you breathe out carbon dioxide, they'll actually follow it. They can also pick up on some of the different chemicals that come off of your skin. So it is true that some people seem to be bit more than others because there are certain chemicals in their skin that seem to be a little bit more attractive than other people. So there is some truth to that idea that, oh, when you hear something, oh, I'm always get bit more by mosquitoes than other people. There is some truth to that. But again, they can actually follow carbon dioxide. In fact, I used to help survey mosquitoes, and I had dry ice in a bucket, and then I would have a little fan and a net, and then when the mosquitoes would fly over, they would get sucked up into the net because they were smelling the carbon dioxide that was coming off from the dry ice as it was thawing. So that was kind of a neat trap. Usually there's a little light associated with it too, so we call it a light trap. We can also catch mosquitoes using what they call a gravid trap, where you have this really stinky broth of water, and then they would lay their eggs, and when they came down to lay their eggs, they'd get sucked up into the net. And then here's a fly that causes, I believe, the African sleeping sickness. I think it's a tsetse fly, if I remember right. Obviously, you might remember the insects are part of our lore. Itsy bitsy spider. And so there's all sorts of things that, and of course, spiders can also bite you and cause, in some cases, injuries, though they are only I think there's only 3 species of spider that actually in the United States that can cause harm, and then you have to go to other countries to come across poisonous spiders to humans, that is. That would be the black widow, the brown recluse. I think there might just be 2 different species of black widow in the United States, and the brown recluse. And the brown recluse, if you ever look at the back of it, they'll have something that looks like a little violin. That's how you know it's a brown recluse. Forensic entomology is actually kind of important too, but not that many people can actually make a living doing it, but it's usually a side gig for people that are entomologists, or it's part of the forensic scientists background. So what happens is, let's say somebody dies out in the woods or something like that, and before there's some kind of idea there's a missing person, so they're out looking for this person, just kind of giving you a hypothetical. You come across the person and they want to know how long this person has been dead. Well, one of the ways they identify how long a person's been dead is they will collect insect larvae off of the corpse. And they'll look at the age of the larvae, and that'll give them a relative idea of how long that corpse has been there, because they can look at the growth stage of the insect. And so if the fly's maybe a third instar, they know that it might have been there for 1 week or something like that. So forensic entomology is actually pretty important in getting an idea of how old. It's at least another bit of the evidence about how old a carcass has been there. I've actually read some papers where people have done research in the field of forensic entomology, and what they'll use is they'll actually use pigs to simulate a human corpse. So they might actually dress up the pig in a human corpse and clothes. They might put it in a burnt out car or start the car this car that they don't want anymore, burn it. And so they have a kind of a pig that's been fried up a little bit, no pun intended. And then they'll come back in a week and see what larvae are found on it. That's the kind of research that forensic entomologists do. But usually it's kind of a side job to their regular job or a side interest, usually.
That reminds me. Oh, sorry, I was just say that reminds me. There's a show called Bones, and they did that, and he would literally identify based on how many days had passed.
Yes.
How long the body's been decaying. It's actually quite an interesting field. That's I feel like should be further studied for sure.
Yes, that's right. No, it's really cool, and I've known a few people that have done some work in it. But usually they always had another research side, but they would, they'd be called to testify in court, so that, and help with the case. Some are this forensic scientists that use entomology, and then there's some people that are entomologists that would do forensic entomology on the side. Here's a fly. I'm sure. Obviously insects have a cultural importance as well as for food. So this would be an example of something that would get eaten. This is a beetle larvae. So they would fry these up or put a little shish kebab like thing and eat them. And I've tried different insects for sure and eaten some of them. Things like, grasshoppers, you can take off and just kind of cook up the legs. They kind of like little Rice Krispies. Excuse me. Trying to think about what else I've eaten. I've eaten scorpions.
Some folks eat spiders, even though they're technically not insects, but.
And meal bugs. And then the other thing is they are now starting to use, I don't know about how common it is, but I've bought things like corn chips where it's like they're now including insect mealworms as part of in the flour. So it'd be like a corn chip. It would look like a regular corn chip, but you would know that 50% of it was made with ground up mealworms. And so I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, there's also a thing where now I think it's the FDA says there can be allowed so many insect parts per piece of food, like chocolate bars and such. So you may never know you're actually eating something like it.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was kind of thinking in the back of my mind, and I'm glad you brought it up, was that we all eat a certain percentage of insects, whether we think we are or not. And then how many people just go outside and we end up accidentally swallowing a gnat? So, and like you said, there's bits of insect that are probably in everything we eat at some level, because they can only wash so much of the plant material off or whatever. So conservation, people should be concerned about insect conservation for a variety of reasons. But a lot of times, the typical person won't be concerned about insects, unless it's flashy and showy. So, the typical, we're going to see an insect in my house. If it isn't a beautiful butterfly, we're going to smash it probably, right? Everybody gets grossed out with seeing the cockroaches. But outside of the house, We want to have a certain percentage, we don't want to lose our insect species. Unfortunately, animals on Earth are going through a more rapid, extinction event, particularly things like amphibians and stuff like that. And so what happens is, if it's something that's big and showy, humans might care about it. If it's fluffy, humans might care about it. If it's a monarch butterfly, humans will care about it. If it's honeybees, humans might care about it. These are what we call our flagship species that have kind of an umbrella effect. So when we learn we don't want to kill off honeybees, then we got to control how we use our insecticides better and so forth, because if it has effect on protecting other species, or maybe we keep it certain areas that are natural and untouched. Just so examples, there is, I don't know about how big of a movement insect conservation is, but it's something that usually tends to be a byproduct of these flagship species, if that makes sense. And then it kind of has that umbrella effect where it helps protect other species. So outside the monarch butterfly, these other species I'm not as familiar with either. I don't know if anybody else has looked at them. But in different areas, they're important, of course, enough that they want to save them. They don't want to lose them. And in doing so, that helps protect other species. So here's our monarch butterfly. This is probably this El Singo blue, I believe. And then, wow, look at that. That giant weta. Isn't that crazy? So obviously it's a grasshopper of sorts that's big as this person's hand. And then we got this green Alexandra bird's wing. Again, just very beautiful and showy. So this is still big and showy. It's not small. So this one looks a little gross, I would guess, for most of you, compared to that anyway. All right. So that ends this lecture here. Let me stop the recording of this.